Hey guys, this is Gabe, and this is Hard Hats and Hard Roads. I'd like to introduce to you my guests today. I have the co-host here, Amanda Unsworth. She's a local psychologist. I have Glenn Thompson here. He's a former police officer, and I have Sue Harvey here, and she's a former police officer, first responder, and executive director of Driving Forward. I would like to talk today about our topic, which is life on the front line and the impacts it has on mental health. And I would like to present you with our stories today. So, Glenn, we wanted to talk about your time in law enforcement and how that affected you and your story and the impact it had on you. So, how did you end up in law enforcement?
That's a good question, Gabe. I just I kind of liked it, and then it was a funny thing. They were looking for police officers in Saskatoon, and at that time, and this is back in 1965. At that time, if you could play in the pipe band, you automatically got the job. And when I went for an interview, they asked me if I could play in a band. I said, "Well, I was in the percussion section of the Lions band when I was a teenager." "Oh, that's good. We need drummers." I said, "Well, I wasn't a drummer. I was a cymbal player." But that, that kind of helped me get on because they were so hard up. And when I started, there was 42 of us in our class, which is the biggest class they've ever had in Saskatoon. So it was a different challenge. I wasn't sure what I was getting into.
I'd like to know, Sue, how did you end up in the military and law enforcement?
Well, growing up, I always wanted to be in the military. And so I, coming straight out of high school, fresh off 9/11, that just solidified things for me. Oddly enough, I went down and I joined the American military because I was a small child and just didn't want to get stuck somewhere cold. And I ended up being based in Savannah, Georgia. So win for me. But no, so it was a great time in my life, and really neat to have that experience. And I remember having times where I'm like a small child and I'm in charge of a multi-million-dollar aircraft. What is this all about? Who made this decision? But it was a great experience. And when I got out of the military, I came back to Canada almost immediately. I was living in Lower Mainland, BC at the time, and I was driving around doing odd jobs here or there, doing different management jobs and stuff like that. And I looked over one day and there's a Abbotsford PD member next to me at a light, and I'm like, you know what, I should probably get a career at some point. And so I went and joined the RCMP, and 10 months later I was at Depot, and it all went from there. So it was just, I always had the drive to help people. If you ask my mom, she's still waiting for me to go to law school and become a lawyer like she did. But I think that's a little bit far gone now. But yeah, so I was always drawn to uniforms and just really appreciated helping people.
That's amazing. How long did you do that for?
Well, I was in the RCMP for 13 years. I spent the good chunk of it in British Columbia, and then came to Alberta in 2016 and served up in high level, and then took over detachment commander over in Château there. And unfortunately, it got to the point where, a lot of the calls were getting to me, and I reached out several times and kept getting the same tagline. I swear they should put it at the bottom of their business cards of just keep doing what you're doing. Be like, I'm literally in crisis right now. Like like what I'm doing isn't working. That's why I'm asking for help. Right. And yeah, so I just continued to fall through the cracks. I was able to get some help on my own time, on my own dime, and which got me back on the road. And then it seems like every time I stepped up to do something new to help keep me on the road, they just put up more barriers in the way. So unfortunately, at the lucky 13 mark, I had to make the call between my mental health or the job, and my family had already given enough. So I made the call for my mental health.
Yeah, that's a very important call to make. Bet you there was a lot of internal struggle with that one.
Oh, it took years of like guilt of feeling like, as a failure and all these things. Like I was a sergeant after just 10 years service, running a detachment in a community that, 5 years earlier I didn't know existed. Right. Like I did everything for the job. And so to not be able to do, because I didn't know what else I would do if I wasn't a police officer. I was so good at it and I loved it. I loved the job. And so, there was a lot of internal struggle and it was hard, but I needed that time. It's been, since 2021. So it's been a few years now. And I didn't realize how bad I actually was until I was out of it and actually had time to de-stress and bring myself back down to normal operating levels. Imagine that, hey?
Yeah, how it's that?
So yeah.
But it feels better, hey?
Yeah.
A little
different.
better. A little different. So, Glenn, how did your experiences impact your civilian life?
It's certainly different being a police officer. You have friends and you lose some friends. So it affects you in a lot of different ways. And people look at you in a different way, I found at first. And after a while, people got accustomed to the fact I was a police officer and I was involved in a lot of stuff in the community. So you have to be involved in your community as well as being a police officer.
Yeah, that's fair. How did it affect your home life and physical health?
It's very difficult at first because you go to situations where it's very hard on you and you come home and you don't feel like talking, and your wife or partner after a while gets to understand that, no, this isn't what we're going to do right now because it's not the time to talk about it. And maybe later you would go into it without going into a lot of detail because they worry about you when you leave for your work, and you don't want to make it worse by telling them some of the horrific things you've done or seen at work.
Yeah, I can only imagine, Glenn. What's it like to meet people on their worst day every day?
Well, it depends on where you're working, what area of the police service you're working in. When you're working in traffic, for instance, you give somebody a ticket, it's a bad day for them. You work in sex crimes, it's a bad day just about every time you deal with somebody. We worked a lot, my partner and I worked in the vice unit, which worked with prostitution and escort services, and we got to know a lot of the prostitutes, and we treated them like people because that's what they are. But, one experience we had was with a young 15-year-old girl on the street, and she was very, very nice little girl, and we tried to talk her get off the street. Every time she was out there, we'd be on her right away to get her off the street. And many years later, I happened to be down at the police college in Regina, and that's part of the university, First Nations University at the time. And I was just leaving after doing a lecture down there, and I'm walking through the lobby, and I hear, Sergeant Thompson. A young girl comes running from behind the office, gives me a great big hug, and says, "You don't remember me, do you?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, you and your partner got me off the street when I was 15. Yeah, that felt good. That felt really good.
You never get to really follow up on stuff like that. You never get to
No,
see
you don't. You wonder
so
what
it's
happened to them.
huge.
And with all the missing and murdered people, we would talk to the girls because they knew we would trust them. And if one of the girls wasn't on the street, we'd ask, "Why aren't you on the street? Why isn't she on the street?" And we get told, "Don't worry about it. She's safe." She just wanted to get out of this lifestyle. So at least we knew that she was safe.
Yeah.
But that comes from trust.
Yeah.
Does that also if you're going to have a relationship with all these people, that's your emotional investment as well. That's a cost to you, a worry, anxiety.
Well, you can't do the job and be cold-hearted. It makes the job even harder. You know, you're dealing with people, and I had a lot of jobs working in the schools and with children, and that is worthwhile. There's things you never forget with that and bring joy to you.
How did your coworkers talk about PTSD or the symptoms, and was there even support or acknowledgement of the symptoms?
When I first started for several years, I was never talked about it. Well, I don't think it was recognized at that time. And if you showed any sign of emotions or anything like that, it was a sign of weakness. And it was very difficult to deal with because nobody, you just dealt with it yourself or with your friends on the job.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But you were in the rural one-man unit.
Yes.
And so was that very isolating?
No, that was different because it's a different type of policing. We do the rural, dealing with the people in the rural municipality, which is the same as the counties here. The RCMP police the area too, and they do all the major things. And if they're short-staffed and there's a serious, like an assault or a domestic situation, if there's only one officer out there, then I would back them up. Or if there was no officers, I'd end up having to take it myself. So it was completely different. But, it was more in a PR type of thing. You're helping people with lost animals, or you're working on overweight trucks and trying to keep the community happy. And then it's a different type of work.
Mm-hmm. The resiliency for being in the police force, what do you do to get through that, to get through the feelings?
Well, I think a lot of it is you become friends with police officers, and not just police officers, but firefighters, paramedics, and even tow truck drivers, because they respond to serious accidents with police and fire and emergency workers. And you discuss things, and we started a little social club in Saskatoon where it was started out as police and firefighters, and then the paramedics started to come in, and you could talk about situations between yourselves, and you felt comfortable talking because they knew what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And that helped a lot.
Sounds invaluable when somebody can validate the gravity of those situations.
Yes, I belong to a couple of service clubs, and I don't mind people asking me about policing. I enjoy it. I can't get into specific incidents, but I certainly can talk about policing and the effects it has on you and the kind of things you see and do. And being in service clubs, it helps because it helps people understand you better and that you're a human. You're not some kind of machine.
Yeah. So did you end up getting help? And if you did or didn't, what kept you from getting help?
I don't know really why I didn't get help. I guess I thought I could handle things. And for the most part, I do fairly well. There's only 3 or 4 incidents that really affect me in a big way. And sometimes when those come up, something will come into my mind and bring that back. And it's like when my son lives up here, we come up to visit when we go through Marathorpe. And I always find that I put my hand over my heart as a result of the 4 officers that were killed there, because I was involved with a shooting to an RCMP member. But you never get over it, and it doesn't take much. Sometimes just a little thing that you see on the news or just something you see will flash back in your mind and bring it up to you again.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you sharing that, Glenn. That means a lot. I really feel for you there. What if there's someone first starting out and first responding, what advice would you give them?
Nowadays, I would give them the advice that if you're having problems dealing with a situation that you experience, there is help available. For many years when I was in the department, there was no help available. And I know Saskatoon has a trained person on staff now that if there's a major incident, when the officers come in, they can sit down and talk to them, or even the victim, they can go out and help with the victim on the scene. And it's more readily available now because it's recognized as a job problem. But like I say, when I first started, it was a sign of weakness, and you didn't talk to anybody about it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I would think too that it's, people would understand after a big incident, maybe that's on the news or something, that we would expect there to be, feelings after. But I also think the feelings happen after those, meeting those same people over and over and trying to help them and doing all of that. That's the sort of that relentless kind of emotional drain that can happen.
Right now, the way things are with the court systems, they don't keep people, they're arrested even on serious crimes. They're arrested and they're released on conditions to be good, behave yourself, be in a house by such and such a time, don't associate with so-and-so. 2 weeks later, they're arrested for another serious incident involving weapons, because weapons are so common now. They're arrested, charged with that, charged with breaching the conditions, and released again until their court date with more conditions. And it's just a revolving door. And the officers, I feel sorry for the officers now, because they're arresting the same people over and over again. And many times now it's 13, 14, 15-year-olds that are involved in these. And it's, you don't know now what you're dealing with, because there's so many weapons around. That's both firearms and bladed weapons.
Mm-hmm. It's dangerous.
It is.
And that's a good point too, that unknown. You don't know what you're walking into. You don't know who's in the house or what they have. And even that unknown piece is an emotional impact every single day.
Well, you have to pay more attention to what you're doing. When you walk up to a lot of people complain, I know since I've been up here in Grand Prairie, complain about they can't have dark tint on their windows in their vehicles. Well, one thing, if you've got dark tint in your windows and you're a driver at night, you don't see pedestrians. But the main thing is a police officer, even in the daytime when they're approaching that car, can't see how many people are in there or can't see what's going on in the car when they approach it. And that's a very dangerous situation.
Mm-hmm. So, Sue, what do you see the barriers being for someone getting help?
Well, you know what? That's something we deal with quite often, is because the majority of the people that come through our program is like, why is this not like widespread? Why are agencies not jumping on and getting on board with this? And the fact is that there is a disconnect. We have a lot of amazing leaders that don't know how to really make that impact on the front line and to the boots on the ground. And although they want to start the conversation, to get that buy-in is so difficult. Mm-hmm. And for many of the benefits that we already discussed, I always say, send me your most stubborn. Yeah. Send me the one that if they were surrounded by puppies and kittens, they'd still be grumpy and not want anything to do with it. Send me, who you think would be the most critical of any mental health program, and talk to them after a 2-day clinic. Mm-hmm. And see how that impact is. And I say that because I am so confident, because I have seen the impact. And it doesn't matter if it's a new recruit, a reservist that hasn't faced deployment, somebody who's been medically discharged. Doesn't matter the level of service, because they have incredible transformations. Right. When I was asking for help, it's because I didn't have the resources. I was, shocker, in a northern isolated post, and we didn't have psychologists. Our closest psychologist is here, which is 5 hours away, 6.5 when I was in Châté, right? So mm-hmm. we need help connecting. And so if you're calling the people that are supposed to be helping and they're not giving you help, they're just saying, keep doing what you're doing, there's a problem. Yeah. And it's not, at no point did I think that they just don't care, mm-hmm. because obviously they wouldn't be in those roles if they didn't care. But there's a disconnect that we have to really mitigate. We need to bridge that gap. Yeah. And this program is amazing. And just speaking to occupational therapists and psychologists after the fact, they're like, oh, you opened a door. You opened a door to a whole new level of possibilities, because they have that possibility of gaining that confidence and moving forward. And even when things go sideways, because shocker, life likes to kick you in the junk every now and then.
Yeah.
So when it does, you have this to regroup and bring yourself back and refocus. So there's a lot of barriers there separating the change makers from the boots on the ground. And the change makers really need to make sure that the systems that they're putting into place aren't just checking a box, but they're actually making an impact.
Right.
And I hate to say it, but the boots on the ground aren't always the ones that are going to point that out, because they're looking up at higher rank and heavier shoulders.
Absolutely.
And they're like, yes, sir, it's fine. We're good. No, of course, not affected at all. No, you're going to deny that critical incident debrief or peer support. Yeah, no, I'm good. Keep trucking on, right? When in reality, it's happening all the time.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and that people don't have to fall completely apart before they get help. You can be functioning in your job and still seek out services for support. You're allowed to thrive in this life. You don't have to survive.
Well, and that's why the concept of like human performance training has, I'm like, why are we not doing this on the front line? Like, we are in the most high risk roles you can think of, because we have not only our lives at risk, but other people's lives at risk. And yet we're not training our minds to function in those high stress situations. We're training our bodies constantly.
Yep.
How many times do we go through muscle memory exercises, but we're not training
Or your equipment. How many checks do you do on your equipment and make sure you have every...
And the biggest thing I get is, well, we don't have time for that. And be like, okay, well, you can send them on a 10-day course for this, but you can't send them on a 2-day course that will actually improve their performance overall on the street, right?
And their longevity.
Yeah.
100%. How much money, like for the ones that, focus on the, the dimes, how much money are we losing because we're not taking care of people's mental health, and we're losing it on performance. So anyways.
I think a lot of people, first responders that have been around for years, don't feel comfortable admitting there's a weakness. Younger people now, they're getting more aware of help being there and the problems that exist. But before, there was no conversations about, except sitting around having a beer and talking about, geez, I can't, But now, I think they're starting to recognize it more and more, and young people are not ashamed to admit they need help. Where the older people like myself, sometimes you feel ashamed because you're supposed to be the strong one, and it's difficult.
But like, how much strength does it take to stand up and be vulnerable?
Exactly.
Right?
Oh.
Right.
Like that's where the true Hercules is, right?
Yeah.
And when I'm able to frame it in a way that you're not at your best, not even like emotionally, but just in overall performance, then they wake up and they're like, oh, well, if I'm not thinking clearly, if I'm not most creative, most, the best that I can be in problem solving and stuff like that, we're not being the best first responder we can be, right? So that usually brings it in too, and they jump on board, especially when I give like, a 3-minute exercise that can drastically reduce cortisol levels, and they make sense to them, and they're like, okay, well, maybe I do have time for those 3 minutes.
Might have 3 minutes in my day.
Like, seriously, like, come on. If you can reduce cortisol levels from like, up to like 40-something% just from 3 minutes, isn't it worth it?
Right. You're going to wait for your coffee longer than that.
Yeah, you're like,
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I can buy into this, right? But it's all about context. And sometimes there's a disconnect between clinicians and the front line, because we don't like to be treated like science experiments either, where we have to define every single acronym, or we have to explain the entire chain of command and why that doesn't make sense to them and all these things. So we're gonna not go to that clinician in that sense, right? So there's layers. There's an entire onion of barriers. But it's doing one step at a time, because if we can build the self-efficacy in our front line, then they can overcome those barriers themselves. But it all starts with those conversations and building that self-awareness and building that confidence.
And killing the stigma.
Breach the stigma. That's why I have. I like to say breach the stigma because it sounds cool and tactical, and But like even on, I forgot my challenge coins before I came down yesterday. But even on my challenge coin, we have a soldier kicking. It is supposed to be kicking a door, but then I changed it to kicking stigma. So stigma's being blown up.
Love it.
And it's pretty darn cool. But that's the thing. It has to be cool. It has to be high speed, low drag, and it has to be tactically sound. And so I say breach the stigma, just like we breach doors and everything else.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times to make the public realize what's going on, first responders have to open up and make people aware of what they go through. Don't hide it. And people will understand more. The more first responders open up to the public, the more public listen to them, then there'll be more pressure put on to get help for people.
Absolutely. Find some allies.
Yes. I hear amazing things. You have a program.
Yeah, well, I essentially made a decision back in 2019. We were dealing with the wildfires up north, and I was in major crisis. I just about lost my battle with post-traumatic stress during that time, and I couldn't talk to anybody about it because I was team lead for night shifts. I was on night shifts for like 2 weeks straight, and I had all these people from all over the province up there working for me, and I couldn't let them down. So, but I found myself in a point where I could physically feel where my firearm was in the room. It wasn't a conscious suicidal ideation, but it was like I was being called. And like anybody who's had a puppy, I instead of putting in the kennel in the basement and hoping I could get some sleep, I put my lockbox all the way down to the basement, closed the door, every door in between, and went back up and forced myself to sleep because I know, like, your brain doesn't work properly if you're not sleeping, right? So, and the next day when I woke up, I forced myself to do something normal because here I am. I'm in a house that's way too quiet for the amount of kids that I have. And I had to close their doors because it was just so surreal. And I went golfing. When I was out at the golf course, I realized a few things. First of all, I got in an argument with the universe because I look up and there's, like, in one direction, it's complete, like, beautiful blue skies. I do a 180 and I turn around and it looks like Mad Max, like post-apocalypse skies. And I'm like, really, this is what you needed me to do? You couldn't have sent me a memo. You had to make me go through all that to realize that this was kind of a good idea. Up to that, I realized that golf provided the opportunity to experience all of these emotions that we experience in our day-to-day life, but in a safe environment. So when I go to my psychologist and be like, okay, well, next time this happens, try this technique. And then I go out onto the street and, something happens, real time, real emotions. That technique goes out the window. I give up on it forever because it clearly doesn't work. When in reality, I just don't have the confidence using it because I haven't had the practical application. And so, it was really neat. And I said, well, maybe we can do something with this. And knowing that we were all athletes at one point, whether it be forced or not, the amount of running that we had to do. And, so we all have a connection to the physical. And especially, you go the APA, they define sports psychology as the, emotional and mental component of physical activity. Well, what do we do as police officers? What do we do as firefighters? What do we do? Like, we're doing physical activity. And very emotionally charged. So why not train like an athlete? And so we developed the program based on that.
That's amazing. And can you tell us what the program is called?
Yeah, it's Driving Forward. There's a fun story there because I'm like, what's something what's something cool that we can do? And I'm like, well, it's golf related. So FOREWARD. And then I sent it to Ottawa to register as a nonprofit, and they kicked it back saying, check your spelling. I said, kicked it back and said, it's funny. Shocker. They didn't have much personality on that end. But no, so driving forward and essentially, you know, you don't have to be a golfer. It has, in reality, it has nothing to do with the golf.
Mm-hmm.
The golf is the practice ground.
Yeah.
To provide you the tools and you know, talk about the psychologist. My psychologist just sits there and be like, all right, what have you done now? Because it's such a great catalyst for growth and improvement when you have that little bit of control back, where you can go in somewhere and realize that, hey, all these tools that people have been throwing at me and they haven't stuck, they actually work. And now that I know how to use them, cool. It's like when you get your new phone every time, you're like, this phone's dumb. I don't know how to use it, blah, blah, blah. But you practice with it and you get the hang of it. And all of a sudden you're using it without even thinking.
Now you got golf game.
Now it's, well, yeah, club champion this year, just saying. But no, yeah. So it's amazing the growth that I can see I've had anybody from, 35-year veterans that have never smiled a day in their life, and they go out there and they've completely changed. The transformations that we've seen in just 10 hours of training is huge. And so I'm very proud of what we've done, and I love seeing every single person that goes through it.
I bet that would be really powerful to see. How can someone get signed up with your program? Usually
the summer months, spring to fall. And then I do workshops during the off season to help out. And it's all human performance based, right? So ultimately, being a nonprofit and limited funding, I go to where people have a need. And well, to be fair, the need is everywhere.
Absolutely.
But if I have a group or even just 2 or 3 people that are willing to work with me to make a clinic happen, then we make it happen and go from there. And that just makes life a hell of a lot easier.
What's really cool about that is that it's actually like the mental health part. So we think of mental health and we think of all the illness that comes along with when our mental health is not working for us. But that is like just a really beautiful, like, this is health and this is a hobby and this is a thing that, isn't, you can do it with your peers and you can find connection to yourself also.
Well, and that's one of the important parts of us traveling to people, is that you naturally create a cohort of peers. Mm-hmm. And so that, like, I could make you come up to me, but in reality, you'd get home and be like, now what?
Yeah. That was a fun weekend that I went golfing and got home.
Woo! And now what? Nobody here understands what I just did. Versus, you have a group of like 12 people around you that you say, hey, do you want to go out? And you don't even have to talk about what you're doing. You all understand what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And sharing stories about what you've discovered and the level of self-awareness that people get is huge. And really, if you don't have the self-awareness, it's really hard to make much progress, right? And so that's really the first step. So it's pretty cool in that regard.
It's amazing. Mindfulness skills to the max.
Yeah.
But with the payoff of it's in the physical world of like, you could see the benefit of it. Like your golf game improves because you're doing the skill.
Well, Deepak Chopra wrote a book called Golf for Enlightenment, which is really good. You should probably if you have any inclination, it's a good book. But he says in there that the golf ball always knows. How often do we have this outside persona that we give off when in reality we're crumbling on the inside, right? And so, and I've had that where I'm going out and I'm doing my own exercises, and then all of a sudden, and I'm doing really well, and then all of a sudden I freaking 90-degree it into the bushes, and I'm like, what just happened? And then I have to self-reflect. And then I self-reflect and I realized that I had an error in thought. I wasn't focused when I thought I was focused. And the ball was telling me, hey, listen up, right? And go from there. So it's really neat in that regard. But again, back on the mental health aspect, simply being outside, how many benefits to simply being outside? And we have so many of our folks that's probably like the only time or the longest that they've been outside in a very long time. Right. And so to have that progress of them, one, gaining the confidence in being out there, but two, gaining the benefits of one, moving, even in any regard, but just getting out there and moving and being outside. Like there's so many layers of benefits. It's pretty darn cool.
Yeah. I can't thank you enough for sharing that with us. Like I'm gonna check it out. That's cool.
Another thing I could mention is it's not always people that help you; it's animals.
Yeah.
Where I lived in Saskatoon, we lived in a small lake in a provincial park just out of Saskatoon, and I loved it down there. And a lot of people would come down there in the wintertime just to walk, especially once COVID hit. They'd come down there and sit in a big space, have coffee, and lots of chickadees down there that like sunflower seeds. And I started putting some bags, giving people bags to feed the birds. I'd meet people and little kids, and I'd show them what to do. And, and they're, this guy's crazy. But, I had one fellow there one day, him and his wife, and he says, well, what, are they going to come and eat off you? I said, well, yeah. He says, well, how do you get them to you? I said, well, you're just standing here. I said, you got one on your shoulder and one on your head right now waiting for sunflower seeds. A lot of people have never had the experience of a live bird, wild bird landing in their hand, and they don't know what to expect. And it's just fun watching the reaction from them, especially the little ones. They're just a blast.
Yeah.
Well, it's any connection with anything outside of ourselves, right? Like we get so distracted by what has happened or what might happen.
Oh, yeah.
It allows us to be fully present.
You just get right in a different mindset. You don't know what's going on
100%.
around you. You're doing this thing out and enjoying nature and people.
Yeah.
Well, and the magic of life is in those moments.
Yes.
Oh,
So
for sure.
You have to be present to the moment to get
That's
it.
a fantastic tagline for this.
Yeah, 100%. I just want to thank you guys for your stories and for coming on the podcast. I'm sure someone will really appreciate their stories just like I have. That's for sure. Remember to check on your friends, your family, and from something that I've learned being invited to a first responders and veterans mental health fundraiser this last weekend, check on your partners. Give them a call. If you're in crisis, call 911. And to connect with the crisis responder and get help without judgment, you can also call 988. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.